or spin the keg. And I said, how is it? Ever since you've never gone to that, I said, that's all fucking bullshit. I said, you don't believe in church, you don't believe in this. He said, it's all bullshit. And he'd sit out on Anzac Day, because I think they used to close on those days. And the only person that had much to do on those days was Mum's father, who was the First World War veteran. And he was the same. Couldn't stand community, suspicious of all government officials, anything to do with government bureaucracy. That's a country thing too, isn't it? Anything to do with authority you're always a bit suspicious about. Would you say that's a common thing across the bush?
I think Australians like to think that we're sort of a bit disobedient and we larrikin.
Whether we are or not.
It's real crap.
Crap, yeah.
Australians are the most sort of conforming people you can imagine.
It's a bit like this bullshit that we're all on horseback riding down the street when in fact we're the most urbanised country in the bloody world. But you know that you talked about in that football team, the Aboriginals, a number of them were crackers. Well, crackers is a Jewish family name, and there was a guy that jumped ship down in Albany, and Kojak was a monument to him. And that's where all his mob from.
Someone was asking me if she thought that maybe there was a chance that the original cracker was actually a wool buyer.
Is that right?
I don't know. You
Well,
would know better than me.
Yeah, that's where he's a monument, and it's one of the Jewish historical books down at Kojak and Albany.
Mark, you must have wanted to be a member of a community. You seem to be implying before that if you had been more sort of felt more at home here, you would never have left the place and would have.
Yeah.
Is that?
I don't know the exact answer, but the need to belong, yeah. And I think my parents, because they were migrants, they identified less. It's very hard for me to define. I suspect it may be really subtle things like just relating, how you relate to your environment. Like when you sent the eulogy with a postcard, right? If you remember, it's sort of a nice picture of a couple of galahs or something on a pond or a lake or something, and so you wrote, probably sort of thing that your dad drove through or something like that. I doubt that he noticed. I remember going up north and I used to go with him August holidays, and I sort of vaguely remember noticing a lot of wildflowers in the fields. And on the one hand, I didn't think too much about it because all the fuck we learned about was English history. That was pre-Whitlam. So if it wasn't a rose or something, it didn't count. But I don't know if it even registered in his mind. Sort of.
But it doesn't.
It's natural enough.
So much as it seeps into you, doesn't it?
Well, listen.
It's sort of.
The sort of, I think, and I never quite spoke to him directly about it, but I think really, as a matter of character, I think he really loved the Australians. Like, I think he liked that, the down-to-earthness. Now, that may have been always, and it may have been something that sort of time did its work, Also, like, I know that for migrants, I saw the function I had in the house. Kids were a major. The kids are a major factor in integrating parents.
Yeah.
Sort of like you go through the school system with kids, and the kids have grown up in this environment, even if the migrants didn't. And to some degree or other, I suppose they forced the parents to come to recognize the different environment, which is different from the views they grew up with. I don't know exactly how they felt all about that, but I always sort of felt like, I had the kids
It's very.
They may not have been rural, but you know, they knew about good surf beaches, they knew about good spots, this or that. And I didn't grow up with any of
But
that.
see, a lot of that,
And I don't know how important it is or not.
I mean, I find it interesting that, seeing we talking about the sense of belonging, sense of community, take for instance my mother, you talked about, you know, we talked about people, although she was, unlike her husband, or she's more educated than my father, but unlike, she was in the historical village, she was in the Red Cross, she was in, she was the honorary probation parole. This is all part as well as being a high school teacher. But once Dad died, she couldn't get out of there really quick enough. Didn't belong. Always had this sense it was not her, you know what I mean? Like
I think these country towns are always
not her space, not her. She actually comes back to Perth.
a lot of women. I don't think women really have taken to the country. I mean, they do it. They're loyal and they do, you know, do all the clubs and all that stuff. But they really would much prefer to be down in the city. But you know, it's all. This is a sort of as you get older, these sort of questions sort of start reverberating, and particularly at a time like I've just been through.
Yeah.
But Frank Kotar, you met Frank, you know, he's Hungarian background, and refugee, all that stuff, you know, all the great drama that all these people that landed out into Australia make their new life. And Frank has always had this idea that it's all bloody contingent, you know. His grandparents were loaded. His parents were dirt poor. Just, you know, bones in their ass, come to Australia, start again, step by step. Frank's a little wonk, doesn't get picked for all the footy teams and all the rest of it. Sorry. And, but the thing I'm getting at here, Mark, is that to this guy, life in Australia was all just contingent. But not only life in Australia is contingent, life anywhere is contingent. It's all luck and ebb and flow and all sort of, you know, the dramas of history and so on. Now, oddly enough, even though I come from the very edge of the world and grew up in a, you know, very sort of just on the edge of a desert, I had this feeling when I was growing up that the sort of the substratum of existence was rock solid. I was absolutely grounded, and life to me has been profoundly disillusioning. I think that's too strong a word, but I have only come to understand what Frank is talking about as I've been through my experience and understand that the world isn't rock solid at all. It actually is extremely contingent. It's extremely problematical. It's a snakes and ladders affair, ebb and flow and so on. And I have changed as a being. I haven't lost my roots, as it were. Mm-hmm. My roots are not in the community so much as in the land and, you know, the sort of the physical entity that we're living in. But I have come to understand that what was, to a child's eyes, rock solid bedrock, that, you know, I am me and my mum loves me sort of feeling and nothing can touch me, and understand that as time goes by, well, indeed, your mum can die and your dad can die and you can lose the farm and your country can be overrun by enemies, or you can go broke, or you can get sick and you can die. It's just a matter of maturing. Is that not the process that the sort of provincial people have to go through? That people that are embedded in a particular community worldview, they don't really grow up until they understand that all community, no matter where it is a contingent entity, highly problematical, here today, gone tomorrow. That's the way it always was. That's the way it's always going to be, and it's childish to believe.
I don't know, because no one. I think the question of belonging, we don't hear about it too much. We hear about all the simplistic Freudian ideas, and mother, either person, father problems, and all that. We don't hear much about the question of belonging. And I think it is an important psychological question. I don't know the answers, but I think we need it. But touching on what you said, I mean, I think most migrants and sons of children of migrants, and maybe even a couple of generations onward, I think they aspire to that sense of not infantile, but that sense of security which probably all infants should have. Should sense.
Well, Frank is
and you can say that Zionism even reflects something like in a lot of ways. Zionism is this attempt in its one of its early forms was this attempt to change the Jewish identity to something where people identified with their environment, in particular with the land of Israel, with the Holy Land. But it's a theme that's still played upon in Israel.
Well, the Jews have got it bad, haven't they? They have always wanted to be strong on community.
Community has been strong. Community is the background, is the backbone of it, but hasn't been linked to the ground.
But from an anthropological thing,
yeah.
One's sense of community is stronger when there's a perceived threat from without.
And the Jews have always felt threatened.
And some may argue that actively the zealous would keep fermenting that as well. It's almost as though, in an ironical way, it's an interest of the Zionist movement to have as many enemies as they can to maintain a sense of community.
Well, they like Thatcher, almost every government in power, it's rather good to have a war brewing on the front to
what I'm saying
unite
is
the people.
From an anthropological point of view,
Uh-huh.
from the whole history of humanity, it's this sense of identity, community, self. It's stronger when you have a threat from external to it. It doesn't matter what society it is. Look at what this bloody...
But it's interesting, is it not, Jerry, that the Jews have always put community identity as a primary goal. What I'm saying about in Australia...
And inside a community, the crucial element is family.
Probably. I think Australians love their family and all the rest of it. But this is a society that is, by definition, a transient, mobile, changing society.
Just as you're going to get on, what you were saying there, I got the phone call, but I missed the last thing you said, what Frank was saying.
Well, Mark pointed out that, to the contrary, lots of migrants actually want to get embedded. They do want community.
Assimilate, to become part of.
Yeah, like my mate the mechanic. Yeah. But Frank is not like that.
But if you actually unpack that and do an in-depth analysis of even that sort of notion, they do, but they don't. They want it. They want to pick the good bits that they can. It's the same in another psychological and anthropological thing. You can put this across on all human groups. They do want to be part of, but on their terms. And unfortunately, with the whole human dynamic, it doesn't work that way.
I think the fundamental thing about Australia, and probably the US and possibly countries like Canada as well, is that it is by definition a place that changes. There's lots of migrants in England, and there's lots of migrants in France and Germany and Holland and that, but they are not migrant communities, because what is really the contest that's really going on there is that France wants to remain France, and these people are expected to become French. But in a country like Australia, it's by definition we understand that as we take people in, we must change.
You know, this is
And we will change. And that strikes each ascendant group as being threatening. However, they get over it and they live with it. And then in time, the new ascendancy gets transformed into something else.
Well,
I mean, a comment. I don't really want to dwell on this, but just can't resist it. I did a bit of research for my son's bar mitzvah on the tribal regime of the time of Moses. I mean, the Jewish thing is based on the Bible, which is written, as far as the Jews were concerned, as far as what we can tell, the Jews were still in the Bronze Era. The Philistines were already in the Iron Era. And you're talking about, but before there was the kingdom of Saul and David was established. You were talking about a tribal regime, and all the laws, for example, inheritance and stuff like that, was based to strengthen the tribal regime, the tribal patriarchal regime, the land that each family or clan or whatever got, and was supposed to, by law, stay within the family. And every 50 years, if you got rid of it, it was supposed to come back to the original clan. All sorts of laws there to strengthen a particular type of regime. We don't think of it as a regime because it's almost anarchic by our standards. We have because in that tribal system, you didn't have any law. You didn't have a central legislator. You didn't have an executive arm enforcing any laws either. It was you enforced the laws that you made up according to blood feud, little ties of blood feud. You got your hefty cousins that you went and knocked on the door of the guy you had a dispute with. There was no police force, there were no courts. There was and in that and Jewish community and sense of community, and they still talk about tribes and stuff like that. Your identity vis-a-vis a tribe. It's based on the Bronze Age conception, and that's not a criticism. That's more. And Australia's already. Australia is white Australia has its roots. How many years? 4,000 years later.
Well,
4,000 years of technological development onwards.
But genetically, my ancestors were every bit as part of the Bronze Age as yours.
Mm-hmm.
Probably in Ireland or somewhere, they were Celts presumably, and they had a rather remarkable Bronze Age civilization and all the rest of it.
And I have no guarantee that my ancestors were in the Sinai Desert. They were probably in northern Russia or something, Cossacks or something.
Yes, I mean the DNA evidence seems to suggest that. But the thing that is sort of that differentiates our points of view, I suppose, here is that the Bronze Age to me is really anthropology. It's prehistory. It's something of intellectual interest only. I don't feel any connection whatsoever with it in any existential sense.
Mm-hmm.
Nor do I feel any existential relationship to my grandparents or my great-grandparents. Only a tangential one to my parents, because their world and their values and so on has been not entirely transcended, but deeply changed in the 70s and the 80s. I think that part of being Australian, is to be comfortable with the fact that we are essentially in transition, and that we essentially are becoming something new all the time.
But isn't that...
Whether we like it or not.
But isn't that... I mean, we've had this conversation, I think, we actually been on around the campfire. You're talking about using just what you said a while ago about the new world is always much more overtly in a state of transition because of the influx of population and maintain demographics. And I remember we talked about Canada, US, and that had a different history significance as opposed to the old world like Europe and France, it has deeply entrenched, or England or Germany. But the state of humanity, this is what I find fascinating, is always in a state of flux, in a state of flux.
Yes.
Even individuals, it might be on a micro level, varying degrees. It's the nature of the beast. The inability of humans to understand that is, to me, one of the root causes why we have ongoing conflict, negative conflict, as opposed to the generic word of inner conflict. You are not the same person, none of us are. If you're a growing, open, intellectual human being, you cannot be the same person you were 10 years ago. You cannot be intellectually the same person 5 years ago. Then I'm talking about on an individual basis. You have new challenges, you're synthesising, processing information. Nations are doing the same, collective human groups.
Well, there was a Greek, I've forgotten his Greek philosopher that said you can't step into the same river twice.
No. You go back to the place, but you can never go back to the time. Even Jewish people or other ethnic groups, they are changing. They're challenging, they're thinking, reprocessing. I mean, sure, there are core elements that are sustainable, but ultimately, I noticed, I was just thinking, I was talking to Mark's mum before he came. She was saying that when Mark left 20 years ago, it's quite a different Australia to what it is today. And I often wondered, like, going up there, I told him, we were talking, going to the uni campuses these days, for goodness sake, every bloody thing on the uni is on the net. The sense of community at a university campus is just not there like you and I and we experience. They come, they go, they hop it, sit alongside these people, they hop out of bloody uni at a desk, lecture, up flip their laptops, bang, bang, bang. The what do you call it, PowerPoint slides that he's got on his thing, this kid's got off the net straight away on phone and taken in their lecture notes.
Mm-hmm.
The other fascinating thing is, big technology is another huge impost. Blogging, people can access, Chinese governments trying to block internet access to Chinese young people accessing politics and all sorts of things externally. That's one side. The other thing was, just looking at an election theatre, I mean, generally speaking, the bulk of overtly what we can tell, the overseas student we were interviewing were Asian kids. Now you have a whole mishmash of African kids and Eurasian kids, and it's almost as though I've gone into I've walked through a corridor to a different Australia.
Yeah.
It's quite different to another one.
I'm going to try and drag you back to the country town thing, because that's where my basic interest is. Okay, the wool buyers were, I don't know if you'd call them itinerants, or maybe on the same, were they in the same class, or the same sort of impact on the community? Did they have the same sort of impact on the community as other travelling salesmen?
Well, in a pub, no, it was big, different dollars, different things like a shoe salesman staying at the Moorlands pub. They must be there for the last 10 years, and a draper and a clothes salesman dealing with different margins, different impact on the shopkeeper. His client was the shopkeeper. He might be only there for one night and moving on, or go to different shops around. His wage was pretty central. Whereas wool buyer would be, predominantly his business wasn't in town, it was out with the farmers. So it's a different, and the whole nature of the business, the money and turnover was different.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore the impact on the community would have been quite different.
Because actually I don't see what you guys think, and in relation to that question, my feeling as a kid, and it seems to be strengthened by talks I've had with a few people beforehand whose parents were, say, wool buyers, even in previous generations. The wool buyers seem to have close links with certain families, probably as human beings, some families closer, some families less, maybe some people even hatred, but somehow that's not the same thing as really being part of the community. What if you guys have any thoughts on that sort of stuff?
Well, why don't you talk? I'll talk too much.
Well, that's an interesting thing, that business of how I don't know whether it's community or whether it's sort of more sort of traditional folk ways react differently to the way in which modern communities react. But to be perfectly frank, I suppose. I mean, we never sort of thought about these things at the time, but I was talking about Perandry before. I was saying, look, it basically was a fairly cohesive little community. We all got on pretty well. But nonetheless, there were different groups of people, and we knew that this person was a Protestant, this person was Aborigine, and so on. In that sense, the Jewish wool buyer was not just a wool buyer, he was a Jewish wool buyer. People understood him to be a Jewish wool buyer. And so there would be a sort of a category, just like there was a category for, the Aborigines formed a category of their own, and there were different sorts of groups within that, and so on. And we knew that the new Australians were the new Australians, capital N, capital A, who were Italians or Poles or whatever, working on the railway line, and that we understood them to be a different category entirely. I think what happened in a little community like Perandry is that all the ingredients for prejudice were there, but there was an overriding need for community and successful interaction that generally transcended those feelings, and they more or less lay dormant. You do have the impression that in communities that were larger and more complex, like in a big city, that the groups could oscillate into their various little groups and allow their identities to sort of fester, as it were, and then there could be this virulent, well, for instance, Australia, the big problem was the Protestant-Catholic interaction was not very nice. There's that sort of thing. There was also, in traditional society, I still see it around a little bit when I travel, is that you often get courtesy and politeness in situations that people say, they're bloody nice people, they're really courteous. Particularly, I often notice this travelling in the States. It's always nice travelling, mixing with Americans in sort of Greyhound buses and that. They're always courteous and helpful, but as time has gone by, I've understood that this courtesy that they have is a necessary feature to make the bloody place work.
Yes.
Because these communities are very, very sort of, they're all, it's pretty sort of fragile, a lot of them, there's all,
So in terms of sincerity, to some extent it was contrived to actually make things...
I think it's sincere, but it derives from a need that, like, I remember standing in a queue somewhere in the States and asked somebody a question and say, perhaps this gentleman here might help me, referring to a black guy standing. He was a gentleman. Now in Australia that would be less the case. You'd say, this bloke here might know, or something like that. It would, because the relationship, generally speaking, I'm perhaps not speaking those in Melbourne and southwest Sydney now, it's probably different, but generally speaking, we didn't have that latent tension. Another case at this point, do you ever meet Leslie Hussey, girlfriend I used to have years and years ago? You wouldn't have known her, but Leslie, she was a Bahamian negress, and every now and again she would go, she worked in Australia, she used to go home to the Bahamas, always travelling across the States. And she said she always preferred travelling across the south to the north. Yeah. And I said, why? It's full of bloody rednecks. And she said, look, it is full of rednecks, and I know that they're all prejudiced, she said, but they are distant and they're courteous because they, they sort of
overcompensate.
They sort of overcompensate. Whereas she felt in the north, it's all much more sort of out there.
In with everyone else.
It intrigued me, but my observation has been something like the same. I don't know why I sort of started talking.
Might try and get you onto the point, and I don't know.
Well, it's
an interesting point
community.
about with the Jewish wool buyer. We maybe touched on that.
Yeah.
a couple of hours ago, is the piece that they were of the wool market they were dragging away from the floor from the auctions in the 1960s. Well, maybe not them. They were the agents of Rex Robinson and some other private buyers who sold to other mills overseas, probably. But there was tension where maybe the battleground was to some point was the rural areas, and the battle was probably between urban elements like the warehouses that sold against Dalghetti's and Elders and so on. Was that? Do you think that was felt in the country in the 60s? Or that
I suppose it was. You're sort of doing a bit of guessing here, Mark. But
yeah.
one thing that has always been a feature of Australian life, I think, has been that there has been sort of inter-community contests as each group has sort of tried to get established and sort of create their niche. And generally speaking, what has been happening ever since the first settlement is that claimant groups have been claiming a slice of the action at the cost of the Protestant ascendancy, the Anglo-Scottish ascendancy. Now, the interesting thing about the way in which the ascendancy has worked in Australia is that they fought back, and they often fought dirty, but they did grudgingly allow each claimant group to get a certain amount of the action, including the Catholics. So the people who really put Catholics on the map in Australia is not really Ned Kelly. It's really people who, Irish Australian businessmen, say like the Knights of the Southern Cross or the Columbus or some fucking thing, what they used to call themselves, Jerry, that, you know, but really solid Catholic organisations and businessmen and that, and they gradually became established, and they gradually got their kids into private schools, and they gradually got money until we've reached a stage now where they've changed political allegiance from the Labor Party to the Liberal Party, and they're actually the most conservative part of the community now. I think the Jews were like that. There seems to have been a certain amount of latitude allowed to the Jews, like the Meyer family and the Monashes and those, that they were sort of contested and held at a certain amount of distance, but they were allowed some oxygen. Whereas, like, that's the way the British treated us. Whereas in Ireland, the British didn't act like that at all. They just bloody squeezed the Catholic population right down to. So you had this odd situation, like in Australia and in Canada, where the British had quite liberal attitudes culturally, whereas back on their home ground in England and in Ireland, and right in their own backyard, they were extremely prejudicial.
repressive.
So, I think by accident, I don't know what the reasons for it is, but it's got I think it's got a great deal to do with the fact that the British ascendancy allowed some latitude.
So do you think that latitude came down, percolated down to little communities like Perenjori in terms of Jewish wool buyers and other ethnic minorities?
No, not so much at Perenjori level, but at, say, the management of elders.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have put the boots in 100%. They would have allowed a certain amount of scope to go to alternative groups. Whereas they could have had the power. They could have just run them out of town. Yeah. You know,
They try funny things. So anyway, I don't know.
Because it's interesting, other ethnic groups had their other battles and other, you had, there was an old fish and chip shop in the deli and certain niche.
But generally they found themselves in an area that nobody else particularly wanted, like the Lebanese with their bloody, rag and bone trade, and the fish and chip shops, and like the Italians working in concrete and all those sorts of things.
Oil building,
In areas that the ascendancy weren't really sort of contesting, they just let it go.
It's interesting because I've read studies where in America and even in Australia, the two most successful ethnic groups academically and financially were, it's always out, it was Greeks and Jews.
Yeah, great.
Those were all the groups.
A lot of parallels.
A lot of
I
parallels.
felt, I don't know about it, I just gut feeling when I was at university. But anyway, this guy that Jerry has met, he is actually from the fruit growing area of Victoria, and I put a similar question to him. And
From Murray River upper, Uchuka, Mildura.
that's less important, but he said to become a member of a country community, it takes something like 2 generations to be really become a member, or to be accepted. I don't know about accepted is another thing, I think.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about that sort of formulation?
I don't think. See, a country town like Barangaree has been born and died all within a generation or two. It's a place that, I keep on using the word contingency, but it always was a sort of a problematical sort of place because it's where it is and all the rest of it. I don't think it took that long to become a member of the Barangaree community, and it hasn't taken long for that community to disappear to all intents and purposes.
Is that my mum?
That's the time.
Yeah.
So like that family we were talking about before, like the Bestry family. Now, if the Bestry family had gone off and tried to start farming, say somewhere like, I guess, Wagen maybe, or Doangra or one of the Blue Wool areas, they could have bought a farm there, and they would have got, would have been able to do business and so on. But they'd never be considered to be a rock solid, true blue sort of group. Whereas at Barangaree, they were perfectly entitled to do what they bloody liked.
Where did they come from?
They were Polish originally, Swan Valley market garden types, made some money, went up there and bought farms. And so if you wanted to do a little kind of analysis of the people at Barangaree, you've got, I suppose the most solid agriculturalists would be South Australian German population, who were Barossa Valley Germans, the younger sons of these families. They haven't got the farm there, so they come across to the Western. They're the ones that brought the good farming practice with them and so on. Much more so than in the Blue Wool areas, because these people were mainly wheat farmers.
And that German connection is the same with East Wagen, down Lake King, Wagen, down to Ravensthorpe, because you've got Lutheran congregations down there. Jerry Munger up out the back towards Espinal.
All came over here,
All came over.
1920s, that sort of thing.
Open the country up.
And so you've got groups like that. You've got sometimes in a little place like Barangaree, you have a group of people who were true blue types, sort of great southern types, who would be the...
Okay, so we're here with Mr. Wasley. So can we have you, if you just start with your name and where you farmed?
I'm Wilfred Wasley. I farmed at Woburn for some 35 years. Then I leased my farm for a short period and went to Albany and stayed there for 10 years and then moved back up to northern part of the state at Badgingarra.
How did you get to, was it you that bought the farm in Woburn?
I bought a adjoining farm to my father in 1960.
Okay.
And my brother took over the family farm in 1965. My father passed away, so he inherited that, and we farmed together for until '78 when I moved to Albany.
And how long has your family been in Woburn? Is your brother still there?
No, he went a couple of years after I left. He went to Miganyu.
And so would it have been your father that had brought in at Woburn, or?
Oh, well, as his father was a pioneer for the district. They had some of the earliest settlers there.
Were they in that 1910 or post-war period?
Yes,
or?
it would have been there, 1914, I think.
Mm-hmm. And so you grew up in Woburn?
Yes, I was born in Dalwallinu.
Uh-huh. And it would have been a pretty tough life as a child. What year were you born in fact?
1938.
38, so just before the war.
Mm.
And maybe at the tail end of the, what do you call it? No, the words escape me. When there was no work and all that.
Depression.
Depression and all that.
Yeah, the tail end of that.
Uh-huh. So, and you probably don't have memories of the depression
No,
because you're too young.
Things were starting to pick up from when I was born.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And was your family, or say through the war, your dad was on the property, or did he have?
Yes, he I think he went there when he was only very young too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what do you have remember incidents? What life was like as a child? Did you have electricity and stuff like that?
No, we wouldn't have done for a long time. We never had, not even in my time, we never had what was known as the SEQA,
Mm-hmm.
State Electricity Commission. We never had that. That came about 12 months after I left Woburn.
Mm-hmm.
79, I think it was.
And so what, did you have generators or you worked on?
Yes, we had, well, in the early days, they only had what they call Aladdin lamps. You run on kerosene.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until probably the 1948, 50s, I would say, that they had 32 volt generators, and they used to bank batteries, and that's how we went for quite a few years.
And what about water, running water? I gather it from Pithara, in that region is...
No, there's no scheme water or anything like that. Even today there's not. It's all, you get the rainwater off their roof and sheds. And you have adequate storage that takes you through 12 months. It's only when they're having drought like they are at the moment that it sort of gets a bit harder.
And why did you leave Woburn? Or that region?
Oh, no, that wasn't the reason. I'd been there for a long time and felt I'd like to venture into something that was more, intensive, stock raising and that.
And how was the, I sort of had the impression from talking to Mr. Butcher that you could, I don't know, what if that's mine? That sometimes this thing, right, something's happened. You know, like land could be very patchy just around the Pithara area where you could have really sandy block and then you move a few miles one way and the other way and you'd have much more reasonable earth.
Yeah, there's a lot in the whole of West Australia. It's very variable from area to area, farm to farm. And we had quite it was a mixed farm, a mixed soil farm. It was quite good.
Well, if you'd already been living there for at least a generation or so, by the time you got your land, you had a pretty good idea of what you were, the piece of land you were buying, I presume. And then I suppose, like, my impression, maybe right or wrong, because the region is mainly wheat growing, was mainly wheat growing, and sheep was more almost a sideline, or was that not accurate?
It was for some people, but everybody had sheep. And they sort of went hand in hand, and they still, even today, people will go out of it a bit, but they'll always come back to the wheat and sheep.
Yeah, at the moment it's about 50%. The sheep population seems to be about 50% of what it was.
Yes, they've gone more to producing prime lambs because its meat market is a lot better than growing wool.
The wool. Okay. Do you have memories of people before my father? Or maybe there was a Mr. Shiner who was, I don't know if he went as far north as Woburn.
No, I knew the name.
And or Mr. Wendy, Sam Wendy.
I think Sam Wendy came once or twice. And there was another chap in the same era as your father, Peter Reisman.
Reisman, yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Okay. But so there wasn't a. So if my dad was coming, like you said, twice a year, you don't remember. I thought you might remember sort of people that had been working the runs before him.
Well, no, we didn't get involved with anybody. Probably the first people we ever got involved with would be your father and Peter Reisman. As private buyers on the property like that.
Yeah. And you bought you bought your farm in the
1960. I bought the
You
farm.
bought your farm.
I was only about 22.
Okay. Oh, so you were a young man. And where did you go to school?
Well, I did a bit of primary school at Gibbeting. It was a local area. And then I did 2-3 years further east again at a place called Carlbro School. It was a family, more or less a family school. And also went on correspondence there for 12 months at the school. It really only went out there to make up the numbers so they keep the school going.
No, as I listen to it, it's almost more and more almost outback sort of existence, even though it's not really considered outback, is it?
No. Though, travel wasn't as plentiful as it is today. It was, people didn't have the vehicles to get about, but in the earlier days, most of them all had, old vehicles.
And when did you get involved in, probably in your father's farm? When did you get involved in the farm?
Well, I left school when I was 14 and then went straight on the farm. 1952.
52. Wow. So in that period, so before Dad and Peter Reisman turned up, you would be selling the wool straight down to the floor.
I think so, yes.
And in a little bit of background reading I've been given. It's an interesting phenomenon that it's almost particularly West Australian phenomenon of the 50s and 60s in particular, that private buying really made a lot of inroads into the wool market. I don't. In fact, I've even come across the big firms like Dalgetty's and Elders, and they were getting a bit worried and started trying to persuade people not to sell privately. Do you remember that sort of stuff?
Oh yes, I vaguely remember that. All taking place.
And was it? I've got no idea. From speaking to a friend of mine from Pinjarra, he gave me the impression that a lot of, as far as selling the wool goes, the clip, a lot of people were already so indebted to the big companies, either for machinery and I don't know, maybe phosphates, to Dalgetty's or West Farmers,
tied up to them,
and they would pressure them to sell through them. Which I suppose means going to the floor. I suppose it's the same thing.
Yes, they'd lose the business, you see, if they didn't.
And did you sort of have any experience like that?
No, I think we weren't really committed to anybody like that, as far as I know.
Okay. And especially, it's just interesting to hear what your experience was. If, from what I've heard about the Woolbars of the generation before my father, they were obviously in different areas. Well, Shiner was in the Dalwallinu region, a bit south of you, but others used to go out the Meckering, no, not Meckering, Meriden Road, and others used to go down south, like in the 30s and the Depression era and 20s and 40s. They used to do a lot of, they started out taking vegetables down south, fresh vegetables to the farmer. I've heard even Sam Wendy used to do a bit of that. And then slowly then they'd fill up the trucks with iron, scrap iron and whatever they could go and bring it back to Perth. Some other got into oddments. And then gradually it got into, they'd be maybe buying, some people would be buying the whole clip. So like when Dad or Peter Reisman came around, you're already talking about the early 60s, so it might have already been a case where they're going for the whole clip, or were they also just starting out with oddments?
Oh, well, whatever they could get. We probably started out by selling the crutchings, there'd only be 2-3 bales of that or something, or oddments. That would have been, I think probably that's how it started. They wouldn't have just sold them oddments to clean up the shed, because it used to cost quite a bit more money to put a mixed bale and send it to the floor, because then you had higher costs of sorting it. And that's where it would have started, I think. A lot of people would have given them a little bit to start with, and they were happy with it, and they come back next year, and so gradually it increased, and people had more confidence to deal with them. So there would have been a lot of, well, in our case, I suppose, there would have been a bit of apprehension about dealing with people you didn't know. And there wasn't very much of that sort of thing done. So they sort of had to build up a respite with the buyer in respect, which we eventually had. I think we did it. I don't think we ever missed after we got into it properly.
And what would your first impressions have been of these guys? Seems to be mainly my father and Peter Reisman. What can you remember about that sort of?
Well, he used to tell us about his background and where he'd come from and that. And of course, you got to remember we was probably the first, other than English or Scotsman, we'd had any dealings with. So we were very interested to hear all about it.
That's interesting, yeah.
And because we were Christian people ourselves, and he was always made very welcome. He'd often come, and sometimes we didn't know he was coming perhaps to start with, but later on at times we knew he was coming. There was always an extra cup put in and an extra scone or two or something, the morning smokers and that. And he was always made very welcome.
Yeah, I'm sure of that. Okay. But so what would you picked up on the accent, the whole physical appearance, or?
Oh yes, we realised he had an accent. It was probably to listen quite intently to start with, to pick up what he was saying. But of course he improved too as time went on. We had no problems after a year or two.
If it was early 62, you probably would have come in on a truck. Oh no, maybe you had a ute by then. You'd remember.
I would have been, I don't know, would have been mid-50s, I would think, that he started coming. I was only a lad, and I remember, right from the first time he came. I just can't remember the exact year, but you'd think it would be about the middle 50s.
Probably. And there was a period when the wars in the 50s actually helped, boosted the wool market.
Mm.
The Korean was early 50s, I suppose, and the Suez. And he said that after the Suez conflict, it died really fast, and the flow fell out of the wool market.
Mm.
Then he went roost shooting
Oh, yeah.
for a while. So I don't know exactly when he went back to wool. But in the late 50s, he went out shooting roos. So, and I mean, when would you have got a phone in the place, in the farm?
Oh, well, they always had a telephone as long as I can remember.
Really?
They had what they call the exchange at Davies, which is just 2-3 kilometres further on. That was another pioneer place. They had Mrs. Davies Senior had the telephone there for many years, and when she retired, went to Perth, my auntie took it over, and Telecom, I think as it was known then, shifted the exchange to their place, and it took them 6 months more to do it. We thought it was horrendous time to, just to shift a phone and all the wires and that.
And where did your family, where are your family roots from? England or?
My mother was English. My father's relations came from a bit of Wales, I think it was.
So your parents were migrants?
No, they were. Oh, my mother was a migrant, but my father was born here.
And where had he grown up?
In North Perth mainly.
So a city background.
Yeah. Well, because he left when I think he was only 14 or something, very early, and he went up to the farm to work with his older brother.
And besides your brother, did you have a lot of? You mentioned an aunt, so you probably seem to have had a bit of extended family in the region.
Oh well, they had Dad's brother was next door to him too.
Okay.
And there's two of them there in the district for many years.
Okay. And what associations did you have? Not sort of getting away from the wool buying, but with the community in the area, like, I don't know, sports clubs or?
Oh yeah, it was a very close-knit community. They, as far as sporting things went, and church and that, they sort of, nearly everyone went to the same things.
Okay, so it's a predominantly Anglican church or Baptist or?
It was, Congregational and Church of England. And went to United Church latterly.
I got a letter from a guy who used to be a shearer called Alan Thompson. I don't know if that means.
No.
And it's probably because he wasn't a farmer, but he said he was around Latham, which is not far away.
I know.
And he said he remembered there was he, I gather, is Catholic, because he said he wrote that after sharing he became a teacher and was in the Catholic system. So I presume that's his denomination. And he described how the building of a multi-denominational, non-denominational church in Latham, which Dad contributed a bit of money to. So you didn't go there?
I didn't go, not to church, but we played sport. We would have gone to Latham, played cricket and football.
Okay. But where's Bunteen? Bunteen's not very far away from.
Bunteen's closer still.
Yes. I think Dad was a member of the bowling club.
Oh, the club, yeah, it's quite possible. Yeah.
And were the sports clubs in Woburn?
Well, they've got one there now, but there was nothing there at the time. There was only a golf club and tennis club, plus a cricket and football.
But they were there.
Mm.
Woburn would be the biggest town between, say, Carew and like between Darwin and Carew. Would Woburn be the biggest?
Yeah, Crewe would have been probably bigger than Woburn.
What's a shire on its own? On its own.
Yeah. Yes, it wasn't. Woburn wasn't very big as the town itself. Only about 20 people or something like that.
There were a few shops and
Yeah, so
railway and the pub. And, Would you have gone, say, to Woburn pub or for a drink or to meet people? Or?
well, I didn't go to the pub at all, so I mean that would have been the meeting place. Although we had our local community at Gibbeting, where we had a sports ground there, but only nothing else. It was just a shelter shed made out of bush and what. And used to boil a billy with a cup of tea.
What sort of contact, like, with the people around you? Did you have like weekend contact with them, or?
Oh, we would have gone to sporting things to met up then.
And met up there. So that sort of seems to be like would that be the mainstay of the communal life, sport and church?
Well, I did a lot of community. At Gibbeting we built a community hall. That was all done voluntary with the.
Yeah, go on.
A lot of things were done like that. Community got together. Or if anybody took ill and couldn't, work their farm, things like that, everybody would hop in and help one another.
Yeah. It's the advantage of the big advantage, I think.
Oh yeah.
Country.
It's much more community minded than what it would have been in the city, I would think.
As a young man, did you ever have doubts about staying in the country and maybe going to the city, or?
Oh no, never. Even today, I never came to the city until I was 60. And I'd still rather be in the country, but perhaps not at Woburn.
Why? You have sort of like bad memories of Woburn?
Oh no, it's just that it's the rainfall's a bit lighter there, and I don't desire to go back to wheat and sheep farming. I don't mind like station life, that sort of thing. I'd quite like. I'd quite willingly go tomorrow and live on a station.
A station is livestock as well, isn't it, mainly?
Yes, sheep, or cattle, and there are a few other diversions too now.
And what's the attraction? Versus the detraction of.
Oh, I think I like the isolation and it's a healthy life.
Okay.
You haven't got to use all chemicals and things like they do in a wheat and sheep situation.
Okay. So the word isolation is an interesting key point. I mean, say on the farm, how many workers would you have had?
Oh, we only did it with all family.
It was all family. And like, did you sort of effectively work the two farms as one, or?
Yes, we did really. It was only it was only my father and I to start with when he worked his farm, and then of course we would have got shearers contract. Two shearers would come in and do the shearing. But perhaps the wheat grader, he'd come along. I think that was about the extent of it. We did everything else ourselves.
Would that have been unusual, not to have at least one hand on the farm?
Oh no, well we didn't have a big area, I suppose. That's probably why we could manage it ourselves.
How many acres were you talking about?
Oh, I think the father only had 3,500 acres.
Oh, between the two of you?
No, then when I got mine, I went up to 7,000.
Mhm.
7.
Okay. And would the conditions, just out of curiosity, the conditions in Woburn, would they have been different to Pithara? Like in general, rainfall and land conditions?
Not a great deal. There was a bit of heavier clay country at Pithara perhaps that we didn't have so much of.
And clay would be a disadvantage, or?
Oh no, not necessarily. It was just a different way of, took slightly different conditions. And rainfall was probably a little better down as you went south. with them.
And when you went down south to Albany, out of curiosity again, were you still dealing with sheep?
Yes, sheep and cattle.
Okay, so I've heard this expression, this blue wool, as opposed to some other stuff. Well, what's that about? What does that mean?
I think it's more or less to do with the likes of Kojonup, as far as I can remember, was always called the blue wool country, and darkened. It was more rainfall, and I think they did probably a better job with the livestock in those areas.
Was it like cleaner wool? Or?
Cleaner wool, yeah.
And but the same breeds of sheep.
Oh yes, it would all be merino.
Well, sometimes remember as a kid hearing sometimes they talk about crossbreeds, wouldn't they?
Oh yes, yeah. There was the Romney Marsh and things like that, but Corridale.
But you were mainly in merino.
Only merino, yeah.
And what sort of clip were you guys getting?
Oh, it'd be between 35 and 45 bales, I think, in my time, would it?
Altogether? Like
No,
that was the whole
just
clip?
on the farm, one farm.
Yeah, but that was the clip including oddments and...
Yeah.
And, okay. And crutchings would be later in the year, I presume?
Yeah, it's a different time.
And actually one of the things I read about was that one of the advantages that private buyers had was that they take care of the headache of dealing with the railways.
Yes, I suppose it would have been, because all we had to do was just load it on the rail and that was it.
And do you remember the days, I don't know when it changed, I would imagine in the 50s, and for a while, maybe till maybe they started representing the wool companies down. My dad would have worked for Rex Robertson, I don't know. Yeah, mainly. Till the 70s, I would imagine, maybe late 60s. But they used to walk around with wads of cash, I heard.
Oh yes. Yeah.
And at some point it changed. So you get it all in cash?
Well, I don't think we did. I think, they sell the oddments in cash, but I don't think very seldom would a clip been dealt in cash. There would have been times when they would have done it, I suppose. But,
maybe in the 50s, I don't know.
well, it would have started out oddments, but I mean, we never had any dealings to, the whole clip was always a check game.
That's interesting. And
well, they were renowned for carrying a lot of money on them.
I don't know if maybe in the early days. I don't know
yes,
about the later days.
Not so much later, but if they were buying oddments, they'd pay cash for it. That's probably how they'd get started, really, because they get paid for it there and then, farmers, and a bit of cash was, considered helpful.
Yeah, so once speaking to my dad about it, he sort of implied that for most farmers, the wheat was the main income, and maybe if they could it's hard to imagine the whole clip, like you said, seemed to be, especially from the 60s onwards, seems to be contractual and with checks. So imagine that's above board. I imagine if it's like that, it's got to be above board. I would guess. Then he said like, I think he was underplaying it, but he'd give the farmers a bit of cash money, maybe it'd be good for the holidays. And
Yes, I think that's how it'd be mostly.
yeah, and what I don't know about for you guys. I don't want to, and I certainly don't want to poke my nose into things that are not my business. Like personal things. But would a lot of farmers have been so tied up in debt or obligations towards the banks and all the big like West Farmers and Dalgadians?
There'd be some of them probably. Some of them pretty staunch. Almost like a religion that they stick with like elders or West Farmers, things like that. My uncle, for instance, he don't think he ever sold privately for many years. I think he probably did later on, but for a long time he wouldn't have done. Would have been.
But what I'm sort of getting at is a possibility that because certain farmers could have been so tied up and sort of, if not in debt, but obliged with a thing, and probably a lot of whatever income they had was siphoned off to either the bank or to the big companies, and a bit of cash would have given them a little bit of breathing space.
Oh yes, it would have been useful that way.
Yeah,
certainly.
Okay. And was your wife from the region, or?
No, she came from Glen Forest in the hills.
Oh, must the Kiss City girl.
Well, yes, I met her at Royal Perth Hospital. She was a nurse.
And you'd gone in for treatment, or?
Yes, I'd had a slight accident and was admitted to the hospital. That's how we met.
That's interesting. And are you still in contact with other farmers from the region?
Yes, a little bit, not on a regular basis. It's mainly we more often than not meet up at funerals.
Yeah, definitely.
Sometimes it's a wedding, but that's all past now. It's it's the next generation come on.
And I don't know, how many children did you have? Or?
I've got two children, a boy and a girl.
And are they, one way or the other, still connected with agriculture? Or?
My son he's up at Dandaragan, working on a farm there for one of the Roberts, right next to the town itself.
Mm-hmm. That's similar, also wheat belt, or?
No, it's more grazing and they do a bit of coarse grain growing, but a lot of it's fed back to the stock.
So anyways, actually I'm sort of jumping back to say that most of you, outside of a bit of like sort of subcontracting for shearers and so a grain class, and you basically did all the work yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would have thought, say, my dad would have been coming around the same time as the shearers.
He'd virtually follow the shearers around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because he stayed at the Wibbon Hotel, because I know our shearers would frequent that too, and he'd catch up with them there and say, "Oh, where are you going next?" Things like that. And he was able to keep his finger on the pulse of where to go without having to run around, and unnecessarily.
Where would his competitors stay? Do you have any idea? I never saw him in the country. Peter Erasmus.
Oh well, he probably stayed at Woburn a bit, but he didn't have a very big hold on the area where we were. I think he might have stayed at Dalwallinu a bit more.
Mm-hmm. Never even thought of it. And the shearers, were they local boys or they sort of
Mostly in the early days it would have been local,
Mm-hmm.
but as time went on, shearers became a little bit more scarce locally, and we had people from the city come up and had shearing runs that they bought into and took over from the local people.
And would you have a class or did you come up with those
No,
shearers?
we did that ourselves in those days.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
Okay. And so how many types of wool would you have? Like, so you'd have crutchings. No, crutchings is another ball game.
Mm. Oh, it would be
Triple A.
3am, 2A, fleeces, which is the broken ones. The stronger one, the 3B.
Okay. So and like you'd bail them and they'd be sent off to Fremantle.
Mm.
Nobody ever questioned the classing or whatever?
Oh, no, but well, I think that's how your father would have, he got to know, his experience over the years, he would have got to know the farmer's ability and their reliability and all that. And eventually, we had to get registered as a classer, and he had a stencil, and that went with that clip for up until only a few years ago. I think it's changed again now to, there's still something similar, but it's a different setup.
Mm. Because my impression is quite unusual not to have taken a class, because I remember growing up with Dad, I always thought there was always a class. So.
Oh, well, if you had enough, if you had a contract team or a big enough flock of sheep, you might have got somebody in to do it. But on the majority of the wheat belt sheep, there weren't too many professional classes doing it. I know we went to Badgingarra, we probably had a few more sheep there, and instead of 2 shearers, we were having to get 4 and 5 in a shed, and then because the volume was too great, you'd probably get a classer then, because you'd get it, be a class that perhaps come with the shearers or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I once did about a week of rousting when I was 16. I can't remember the name of the farmers. Maybe Fitzpatrick or something. And that was hard. Once you got the cleaning up and all that, and cleaning the fleece, that wasn't hard. But once you had to press those
Press
back,
it,
that was hard work. They didn't do that. They had someone bigger and stronger to do it. A permanent hand. And so I gather, you had your family group, and you didn't have many people in terms of workers coming in. It was just like visitors and that sort of stuff.
That's all, yeah. So,
and the relationship between, I gather, when the shearers came on, it was a different type of relationship than the wool buyers, I gather.
Oh yes, it would have been. All the shearers you probably would have known, beforehand. But then as the time went on, you were treated as equal then.
And would they stayed on the farm when they were shearing? Or
yes, they did. From Monday to Friday.
So they sort of had sort of a few bungalow type places.
Yeah, well, we had quarters for them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what sort of do you think these little Jewish wool buyers, do you think they had any impact on the community? Any
Oh yes, I think they did. I thought they did quite a helpful to the communities, especially with the cleaning up the oddments and things like that would have, you know, it was a way for them to get into the business and the farmers to clean up their
The sheds.
oddments and get the shed cleaned up. It was, you know, cheaper to sell it to them like that than to put it in a mixed bale, and half the time there wouldn't be a bale, you know, there's only, you know, put a lot of stuff in to make a bale up, and you know, crutchings and locks or anything like that wasn't worth mixing it up. It didn't pay.
But was one or two bales of wool worth how much money could it been worth?
$200-300 probably.
Or maybe in those days it was worth more. These days you can't walk out of the supermarket without paying.
No.
Okay. So. And when we said afterwards you moved to, I've forgotten, after Albany to
Back up to Badgingarra.
sort of better farming land, or?
Well, it was a very reliable area. The block I had was very good, yes.
I gather it's getting pretty close to the coast then.
Yes, we were only about 17 kilometres, I think it was, from the coast. It's one of the biggest mistakes ever made, I think, selling that.
Ah, yeah.
Because it changed hands a couple of years ago for over 2 million, I think it was. I sold for about 300 odd thousand, 10 years earlier.
Too early. And what do you think in the last, I don't know, couple of decades? There seems to be these new ideas coming up, you know, like floriculture and that. I gather the Williams do some of that.
Yes, Don's very involved with the flora. He's botany.
Is that something that you could I from reading like stuff about the Karoo Shire, and maybe it's I don't know, strong, but you find some in Karoo. Would Woburn be just not on the map on that for that sort of stuff?
No, Woburn be renowned for their wildflowers and that on the Painsmont Road. That's well known, but actual growing growing a flora out at Karoo, there is a farm that's done it for quite a few years. Quite a big farm. I think it's actually changed hands recently. There'll be nothing like that done at Woburn.
Is that just a question of nobody taking the initiative, or the conditions
probably,
aren't right?
It's more suited to the Karoo soil, and there'd be plenty of water, underground water there that they could use to irrigate or to water.
Because I think Mr. Butcher told me that. I asked him why it was that. I'd read that pioneers had got into or started farming around Karoo, in the Karoo Shire, maybe in the relatively late 1800s. And I asked him why they're even further north, and why Dawalinu, maybe 20, 30, 40 years later. And he said it was the availability of water around the Karoo area, which
probably yes, it probably would have been.
So that I didn't know of that before.
So you wouldn't have found any natural water, I don't think, around Dawalinu Buthara. Perhaps, well, you might get an occasional soak or something like that, but it would probably have to be cleared before those sort of things develop.
And as local people growing up there, did the stuff like the wildflowers and nature and all the stuff maybe that's become fashionable in the last couple of decades, did you relate to that then?
Oh, well, we took it for granted, probably a lot of it, because we had it on our doorstep. But it did come to mind, you know, as we got older, the value of it
Mm-hmm.
as a tourist attraction and things like that.
Yeah, like sort of it's maybe a real city sort of thing to think of the beauty of the country, and I gather the farmers, you know, for farmers it's their livelihood. It's not so much a question of but would you wake up and think, oh, wasn't that a wonderful blanketing of flowers or I don't know something like
Yeah,
that?
but you wouldn't have that on the farm because the wildflowers wouldn't, unless you had standing treed area,
Mm-hmm.
because they don't grow, so wildflowers don't grow much at all once its soil's continually disturbed.
Uh-huh. I didn't know that. Because I mean, I vaguely remember this sort of seeing quite a lot of wildflowers. I mean, I'd be probably going up right in the right season as well.
Yeah,
July.
you see it on the side of the road, you see, that wouldn't be disturbed very much.
Uh-huh.
And they'd grow amongst the trees.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So, because I don't think my dad at all related. I don't know. I don't think he related to the countryside. I think he was more like,
not.
you know, he probably had his memories from childhood, and
Yeah.
he didn't quite live up, or it was different. I don't know, and I don't know if he gave it two thoughts. When you grew up, did you sort of think, oh no, the idea of what's nice and attractive has to look like a postcard from England, or?
Oh no, I don't think so. We were quite content with what we had.
Mm-hmm.
I think we entertained ourselves much easier and a lot better when I was growing up than they do today.
And what sort of stuff did you sport?
Oh well, there was sport and we had bikes. I think you know, we'd come home from school and that, and it was nothing for me to. I had to ride, I think. 4 or 5 miles to school,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd get home from school and I'd race around on a bike and that till it was dark, more often than not.
And what's the difference in ages between you and your brother?
6 years.
That's quite as a little kid, that's a fair bit.
Yeah, we had a sister in between.
Uh-huh. And where would you, like, school holidays, what would you have done?
Oh, we would have just stayed on the farm.
Yeah? You did take a vacation to the coast or something?
Would have done it after harvest at Christmas time. We would probably spent two weeks in Perth or at the North Beaches. We had a family holiday house there that we sometimes went there.
In the north of Perth, you mean?
Yeah, where it's it's called Treat now.
Trees, Waterman's Bay.
Waterman's
Yeah.
Bay.
The days when that was on the outskirts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
That's city centre.
$1 million houses and more there then.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we had friends had a place in Waterman's Bay, and that's just suburbia now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then what about the Royal Show? That's up.
Oh, I went to that occasionally.
Mm-hmm. And if there was something, a show in where would that have been in the local area?
At Dalwallon.
And was that an important event or?
Oh yes, a lot of the majority of people would have gone to the show.
And like, was it important economically or just a social?
Just a social, really.
Mm-hmm. And if you're looking for, I don't know, as farmers I don't know, what's the importance of good stud farms around the place, or is that something that was a major part of your breeding of sheep and all that, or you let go?
Oh, we would have bought stud rams all the time. I just can't remember where they got them from now. It's something I didn't have much to do with.
Mm-hmm.
I've forgotten a bit about that side of it.
So the shows weren't important for that type?
No, not really. It was mostly a social, or perhaps when they did have a machinery and tractors and cars on display, that would have been a, you know, interest in that
Yeah.
for the farmers to go to. But that would be long before the Darwin Field Day and places like that came into being.
Machinery's gone huge.
Oh, it is, yes.
It's amazing. And it's like Mr. Butcher was explaining to me that if you know they have maybe tripled maybe their farm size,
Yeah,
but they still have the same number of
workers.
workers.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Yeah. Anyway, well, maybe I'll turn this off and let you relax.
Would you like a tea or a coffee?
You said that when you first met, it was interesting. You know, these guys coming from another environment, and you talk quite a bit with them. Sort of they're coming from maybe another world.
Yes.
Things like that. Sort of conversations.
Oh,
you
we would have
had?
talked about, you know, what conditions were like and all that sort of thing a bit once we got to know them.
Mm-hmm. When conditions where in Australia. Or?
No, from where he'd come from.
Mm-hmm. And was that just interesting, or
Oh,
did it have something else sort of tick off in your mind, or?
can't remember now, but oh, you know, we were always interested in how other people got on.
Uh-huh.
But,
Yeah.
because I was, you know, would have been fairly young at that stage, and I've been out of it for 20 years now, so it,
Makes it
memories are not as
yeah, I know the feeling. Yeah. So, and I don't know. Did you talk about? I seem to remember a lot of times you'd ask him about Israel, and maybe when there was a war on or something like that, they'd ask him all sorts of questions like that. Would you get into did you talk politics with him? Probably not Australian
not
politics.
a great deal, I wouldn't think, and we probably wouldn't have talked about the war things either, because my family's never been involved, so we not. Well, they'd be interested, but they're not. You know, probably wouldn't bring it up.
Mm-hmm. So, and how long would, like, say if you'd come visit the farm, would it be like for half a day or for an hour, probably a bit more?
Oh, I could be there 3 or 4 hours sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Other time, well, in the earlier days he'd be there longer because he had more time on him.
Mm-hmm.
But as he got, as time went on, he got a lot busier, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he had more people to see, and it got more commercial. You know, time was on his side. You know, he had to
Move on.
move on.
And would the quality of your wool have changed much from year to year, or could he sort of come in and say, "Well, this is the Wasley farm. I could almost buy blind."
Probably, yeah. Once he knew what how the season had been,
Mm-hmm.
because we did improve quite considerably, I suppose, because we used to have the sheep